Hey everybody, it's Becky with A Better Way to Homeschool, and we're here with, I think we're at episode 17. Today is all about yarn and socks and war. And I am thrilled because today is more of a homeschool lesson and a walk through history. And what we're going to be doing is I have my friend Emily here. Emily, wave, say hello. Um, so yay. Okay, Emily cannot see me. So the way that her camera is situated, Emily, what I'm telling everybody is that we are going to be walking through history. This is more of a homeschool lesson more than an interview chat. And I'm super excited about this. First of all, can you just introduce yourself and tell us where you are on this planet of ours?
Sure, I'm Emily, and I have about 100-year-old sock knitting machine, and I'm making socks with it in Moberly, Missouri, the middle of the country, flyover state for a bunch of people, but I love it here, and I knit socks and other things.
So I met Emily. She's in our, met Emily in one of the Facebook groups. She's in my homeschool huddle with me, and she's turned, in the course of the time that I've come to know her, not only is she just a friendly face on Facebook, but I consider her a dear friend. And I remember we were fleshing out something. She was helping me troubleshoot a technology issue that I was having. And she casually mentioned this antique sock machine that she has. And I said, Emily, you have to show me this antique sock machine. So she did. She took some pictures or a little video. Do you remember that, Emily?
Soon after I'd gotten it and wasn't sure what all I was doing with it.
Right. So she shows me the sock machine. And what gripped me was she shared a little bit about the history. So this isn't just a machine that makes socks. And before everybody, in the descriptions, you can find a couple things. You can find a goodie that I'm giving away for free to the first 20 people that click through in there. But you can also find the link. Now I'm going to stand up because I got to show you. I actually have on a pair of the socks that Emily has made on this fancy machine. Even though we are 1,200 miles away, Emily's daughters tell me I am 1 day and 4 hours drive away from their house. So that's really cool. But this machine dates back to before World War I. And there was this was a time when the boys in America, those young men, were sent overseas to fight in World War I. And there was a huge need because the boys were thrown into a trench war and their feet were, I was reading as I was preparing for this interview, they had this special hardy boots that tore their socks apart, just tore their socks apart. And the seams they weren't intact. So their feet would get wet and they didn't have enough socks to keep their feet dry or warm or healthy. And as anybody that has ever learned anything about war, when your feet are messed up, you can't do what you're supposed to do. So this was a huge need. And there was this call. What do you know about that time? But before the sock machine is introduced, what else do you know about that time?
So there were a few hosiery companies around manufacturing. But it was just the beginning of the industrial era, really. So the hosiery factories were built on rivers and run with one crank and then a bunch of pulleys pulling machines like this. Just they were a little more automated, but they couldn't keep with the need that the soldiers had for knitted things.
Right.
More than just the wrist warmers and the hats and they made mufflers. They call them mufflers. They're scarves that were like 11 inches wide by 68 inches long was the pattern I saw for them. So
right.
Wide scarf.
And so the American Red Cross kind of went into this high gear, and they solicited help from Americans across just this blast. Help, do your bit for the boys, they did this massive push to have all the women and children that were back home to begin knitting socks, and those wristlets that would go, they were like tubes that would go over their wrist with a hole for their thumb, so that the soldiers, their hands would stay warm, but they could still operate their weapon when necessary. And it was such a massive push. I remember stumbling upon this before I met you. I taught one of my kids how to knit, first crochet, then knit, because he would drive his brothers crazy during read aloud time. And when I was defending my position to have, I'm never politically correct, but I was talking to somebody that was giving me a hard time about boys knitting. And I said, you don't understand. Boys basically invented knitting. And that was something that sailors did. And during the war, when the children were learning how to knit, and they would knit little samplers, little washcloths, that the boys would actually have knitting wars to see who could knit and make the most noise with their needles as they were knitting. And so the women and children were called to create socks and wristlets and the mufflers and sweaters. And they had this massive need. They needed over 1 million pair of socks, over 1 million wristlets. And all of these things at the time were basically handmade. Now, you were just telling me, how long did it take a decent knitter to make a pair of socks before the machine?
On the needles, the itty bitty needles with the thin yarn, it was about 30 to 40 hours for a pair of socks.
Wow.
But it changed everything.
So when I was reading about that, so 30 to 40 hours, they were saying an expert knitter could whip out a pair of socks in about a week. And at first I thought, wow, that's a really long time. And then I thought, wow, that's a really long time if you have to make 1 million pair of socks. So they had people knitting all over the place. You'd even see the president's wife, if you look back at pictures during the time, she'd have her bags of knitting. And Americans were encouraged, women and children were encouraged to knit in every pocket of time that they could find. And in the printable that I'm giving away, I found these old quotes that were in the magazines and the newspapers, where the children were taught things like, do mother's work so she can knit, or help your grandmother so she can teach mother to knit. And the kids would, they were encouraged to knit during, I guess you'd call it recess time, but during their free time at school, they would be knitting their little squares. And there was a big push for knitters here in my side of the country, in Seattle, which is across the water. But the kids would create these squares, but they'd be filthy when they were done because they were doing it outside when they were playing. But there was this whole patriotic, why did everybody get in there? Why were people knitting the socks and the mufflers and the wristlets for the boys overseas? It's because the boys needed them, but it also gave the women and children back home an active part to help in that whole effort to win the war. It was huge what they did as a country. Fantastic. Kind of reminds me after 7/11. I was telling the boys yesterday, after September 11th, there was a meme running around Facebook that I miss the America of September 12th. That time period right after this massive tragedy, where the country and the world united to come together to just say, no, we are united, we are one. And the same thing happened with this push to knit, this push to put dry socks on the boys' feet. It was fantastic from a patriotic standpoint, but it also made a difference for the boys overseas, because my husband, when he was in the Navy, when mail time would come in, I always took the extra effort to decorate his envelopes on his cards. So they would pull out a mailbag and that you could pick the card that was mine from a mile away because it was covered with all this design. But receiving something like a warm pair of socks and a note from somebody from home meant the world to those boys in the trenches back then. So anyway, the whole reason that I have you on is to demonstrate this cool thing that you have in front of you. So tell us the history of what this was. So Red Cross, this is a circular sock machine, right?
Right. There were a few machines that have been around in the late 1800s, but they really picked up steam and momentum when the Red Cross started distributing them to help families produce more socks. Because, like I said earlier, the few textile factories that were around couldn't keep up.
Right.
And anyone who could do the hand knitting was doing it. But these existed and could do it so much faster. So it was 30 to 40 hours for a pair of socks on the knitting needles.
Right.
And it's up an hour with knitting it on a machine and closing maybe a little bit more for a pair of socks.
So just to say that again, so in doing it by hand, it would take somebody a week to knit a pair of socks if they knew what they were doing. But when they had access to that machine, and once they understood how to use it, it would take them about an hour. So in that 30 to 40 hours, they would make 30 to 40 pair of socks. That's huge, the difference. And the Red Cross actually, once you so you had, if you had access to the machine, didn't they also give you the yarn?
They distributed the machine, and it was an agreement of, here's the yarn in the machine. We'll be back in a month. You give us socks, we'll give you more yarn. You give us socks, we'll give you more yarn every month. And then at the end of the war effort, the families were able to keep the machines if they had kept up with their part of providing socks for soldiers. It wasn't just in America. Like you said, it was a big push in the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
It was also, my machine is a Canadian machine. So it was also, Canada did the same thing, the Canadian Red Cross. My machine's from Montreal. It's a Laguerre 400. It's about 100 years old, somewhere between 1914 and 1924 was when this model was made.
Wow.
But like with the war.
Wow. So when I heard all of that, I had to see this thing for myself. So I was so thrilled that you showed it to me. And then, so this machine is not just, it has a learning curve to it. You don't just get it and then you can make a sock that same day.
No, I'm making it look easy. So
right.
One crank of, if any hand knitters are watching, check this out. So one turn of the crank handle, I just knit a whole row of socks. One whole row.
Oh my gosh.
And another row. I used to knit socks by hand, and it still blows my mind how much quicker this is.
Wow.
So you can see, hopefully you can see from that far away that it's just growing more and more sock on the inside of this, and then it comes out the bottom.
Wow. Okay, so just crank for a second. When I showed this video, when I showed this machine to my youngest son, who is my dyslexic, he's my pogo stick jumping, archery shooting, soccer playing type active. He's got to be moving. When he saw this machine, he was dumbfounded, and he instantly went online looking to see, oh, can I get my hands on one of these machines? Because he's the one that crochets and knits. Because he needs to have something with his hands when we're reading aloud. But this machine is mesmerizing. I love the sound of it, but it is, okay, it can't just be me. I think it's wildly satisfying to spin the crank and then to watch that middle just grow and grow and grow. That is the coolest thing ever. Okay, so go ahead.
Socks were green or brown or gray or navy blue. We have cool yarn now that does stripes and wonderful things that they just didn't have access.
right here, I'm going to take my sock off just because I can, because I want to show people. So Emily made me this sock. I actually have the whole pair. The other one is on my other foot. I have 3 pair of socks from Emily, and they're all hand cranked on that machine, which this blows my mind that it can have just patterns through it. But I think that's spun in or dyed into the yarn, isn't it?
It makes me look good.
Does it? Okay, so it's the cool yarn. So and then it creates a tube, and then there's still some hand work that you have to do. Okay, cool. Is that a pair?
This is a pair. So it comes off the machine. You have to start with some knitting on the machine. So you hang, this is called a cast on bonnet.
Okay.
And you hang on the needles and weight it down. Because if you don't have the weight, the yarn just bounces right off the needles.
Oh, okay.
And salmon color is waist yarn. And then the start of the sock. So
okay.
there's my hem. It's stretchy. I ribbed the top there. And then you crank to the heel. And I'll show you in a second how to do the heel.
Okay.
So that's some hand fiddling on the machine to make the heel. Then crank around and around and around for the foot. And then the toe is another heel.
Wow.
But then sewn up. So you take that waist yarn out and then you hand close them.
Wow.
So you sew it up. It's a seamless toe. The way you sew it up, it's just another row of knitting. So,
okay.
So they're really close up nicely and don't have any bumps.
That is the coolest thing. So this machine revolutionized the ability for the women and the children back home to actually, it was one thing to be able to knit a pair of socks for soldiers out in the war. It's another thing entirely to be able to crank out quantity of socks that then impact many people out on the front lines. So that it was huge what this machine did. So before I want you to show them what else you can make on this machine, because it's not 1917 anymore. And so you can make some cool crafts and things, but I wanted to show some what's in the printable. So the printable that Emily inspired is there's a little sock booklet in there with copy work, different things that you can make, a little record of everything that you learn about that period in history and about socks in a cute little booklet. There are reading passages, short little reading with questions and answer, like a question thing, some copy work for the kids to work on their books. Younger kids can make a matching pair of socks. I was thinking about this. This would be really fun if you did multiples of these. Then you could cut it out, and then you could make a massive game of memory. And then there's also little foldable cards that have kids' ability to write notes to anybody that does them anything that they appreciate, where they can either share what they've learned about history, or they can just leave that as a conversation starter, and then they can write about anything that they want to. So that printable is free for anybody that clicks over for the first 20. And then, yeah, once the coupon's gone, it's gone. But so I'm fascinated by this time period in history anyway. This machine is just, it's fantastic the way it works together. But as we begin to wrap up, Emily, you can make more than socks on this machine. So I was hoping that you could show us some of the things. And then if anybody has any questions, let me know and I'll pop them on the screen.
These are my favorite.
Oh,
the balls.
They're cute.
They're really light and wonderful, and they don't break lamps very easily.
Right.
So we toss them around the living room. And
very cool. Squish. Those would be really good, like for kids that need something in their hand when they're studying. That would be a really great, quiet thing for them to be. My son needs to have something in his hand when we're studying. So cute. Your socks. Your socks. Hey, if I was somebody that did want to order socks, do you just have a stockpile of socks that I choose from, or do you does somebody throw? I think I said, "Hey, I'd like these colors," and then you made me socks from a color selection.
Ones I like knowing who they're going to when I make them, but I do have a big pile
Okay,
ready to sell. I don't have them all individually listed at the moment, but I will get
right.
to that.
Okay, cool.
But so
Socks,
little
those are
mini
cute.
socks.
Hold it out like straight out, like 2 feet in front of you. Oh, they're so cute. I love them. Okay, very cool. So socks on the circular machine.
And cup cozies.
Ooh, for some of us that like our coffee or tea. Very cute.
And fingers because that's annoying. And it keeps your tea warmer for
Right,
longer.
right.
The tea drink.
For the tea drinkers.
And
This is my favorite. I love this thing. Okay, what is the story behind that thing?
this humongously long tube that I stuffed as I went because there's no way I would have gotten a 9-foot long tube stuffed at the end of it.
Right.
So that's how we fill stuffing it down my machine as I went. But that's hundreds of rows of knitting and then knotted it up and closed the ends together. And now I've got a pillow or cushion or, yeah, we use it as a pillow.
Yeah, it is the cutest thing. It is so cool. So,
And I
go ahead. Excuse me.
all kinds of things. Basically, if it starts out as a tube, or I can increase and decrease it to make balls. So that's half a toe 6 times to make a
That's
ball.
amazing.
Kind of cool.
That is amazing. I love seeing old pieces of machinery reincarnated, brought back to life. I love when people do things using old school techniques. Making bread by hand is another thing that's really good. But so there's a couple people that keep popping on and off. When Emily does the crank, so say that part again. So you go around once, that adds a whole row, doesn't it?
Rotation is a whole row of knitting.
That's amazing.
And then turning the heel. So you lift needles out of work. I'm not sure how well you can see it from there. You lift a needle and then these are not getting stitches on them. So
Okay.
it's just decreasing the amount of stitches on that back side. And then you start lowering the needles to start increasing the number of rows again, and that makes the heel shape to
Wow.
get it turn a corner like that.
Wow. Just wow. That is fantastic.
So that's
So how long did it take you? So you got your machine. How long did it take you to figure out this old school tech?
Well, the wonders of YouTube and the slow pokiness of international shipping, I had it pretty well figured out in my head before I got my box open because it took forever through customs to get from Canada.
Oh, wow.
So YouTube was amazing. And I was a hand knitter ahead of time. So the basics of how the needle or how the stitches are formed
Right.
and how a sock is constructed, I already had that in my head. So
wow.
I prepared the first weekend that I had the machine. They weren't perfect, but my husband wears them.
Right.
So that's the first pair. They weren't perfect, but they're wearable. So,
right.
But other people, it depends how much it comes to some people and it doesn't so much for others. So.
Right, because you have to be a little bit mechanically inclined. And it said that as I was doing the research that, so here it is, this war effort, and you're trying to get these socks on the boys overseas, and there's all these women and children that are not crocheting, but knitting socks and mufflers and wristlets and sweaters, and everybody's doing it, so much so that if you made something with pink yarn, oh, you were scorned. Like you were not, because everything was made in army that drab green or whatever, like the drab army colors. So if you happened to make yourself something beautiful, it was immediately pointed out that you were taking time away from your time to actually help the boys overseas. And your selfishness could actually lead to the fact that somebody else wouldn't be able to be healthy on the war front. It was huge. And I forgot what I was saying. But anyway, this whole idea of being a part of something and being, I totally forgot. Now I'm just totally making up what I was going to say. But it's fantastic.
On an old machine now. There are a couple companies making new machines, which
Right.
is kind of cool. They are on this, but they have some new technology in them. But this one's 100 years old, and it'll last another 100 years if I keep it from getting wet and rusty. So
right. That's amazing. Do the girls, now your girls are younger, do they ever work? Do they like making socks? Do they do it?
Sam likes to help. Melody appreciates what I make, but she's not helping yet. But
right. Very
there.
very, very cool. I love it. So first of all, thank you for coming on and showing us your machine. Thank you for introducing me. I was thinking the other day, I think I shared something on Facebook that basically said, you know, don't buy your kids new things to teach them, but instead together learn something that you don't know anything about. And this machine is one of those things for me. I went from not caring at all about handmade socks. And I mean, not at all. If you look up the word cheap in the dictionary, if you actually remember what a dictionary looks like, my picture is right next to that word cheap. I do not like to spend money. I do not buy handmade things. But the story behind this machine and the legacy of being a part of this season in American life where everybody was singularly focused on the good and the care of our boys overseas was so powerful that I became a believer overnight. And not just in the hand machine, but in this idea of being part of something that's bigger than anything that I could imagine. So I actually have 3 pair of your socks, and I love them. They're just my favorite things. And I would encourage anybody out here that's watching as we get ready to wrap up, because this is a short thing that, you know, one of the ways to grip our kids into learning something is exactly with this kind of an experience, to show them what old school things look like. But not just the machine, not just a pair of socks, but the history and the story behind it. You know, it's so powerful, and it's just amazing to bring this part of history back to life. So anyway, I am not seeing that anybody has any questions. So Emily, I wanted to say thank you for coming and spending half an hour with me today. If you don't mind just hanging tight just for a second, I'll be back with you in just a second. So, okay, thank you. Oh my gosh, I absolutely love that gal. And I can't even tell you, her daughters are amazing. Her machine is amazing. Her family is amazing. And I'm forever grateful for being introduced to this time period in history where there was a need, and the women and children at the time came together to take care of their boys overseas. We're not in a culture like that anymore. Now it's not just the dads and the brothers and the sons that are overseas, but now we have moms and daughters and cousins and sisters and aunts and uncles and brothers and all these people standing in the gap for us. And how important it is to knit together as a country, as a people, where we support our troops, understanding that we are enjoying freedom today, sitting in our houses, walking around the country, doing what it is we want to do, expressing our opinion, whether we're in support or against of, what the government's doing or who's running for office. None of that matters as much as understanding that we get to voice our opinions. We get to drink our tea on the street with a little cozy on it, without fear, because of those men and women that have stood in the gap for us. So just as a suggestion, inside the Boys in Socks packet that I made, that I'm giving 20 away, inside there is an opportunity for you to either share a piece of the creative writing or one of the notes with soldiers overseas. I would strongly encourage you and myself to let our kids know that there are men and women, boys and girls, from my perspective too, at my age. The kids are so young, but there are people standing in the gap for us right now. And although we don't need to break out our knitting needles and send them a million pair of socks and wristlets, there are things that we can do to show them that we are grateful. Even if we don't agree with the politics, those people that are standing in the gap for us matter. And so if you have loved ones overseas or at home and they're serving, what a fantastic opportunity for our kids to be able to write them notes of encouragement, notes of thanks and gratitude, and to take this time to study this time period in history, this time in World War I, when our country was in dire need. The boys were gone. They were all overseas. And the people that were back home, standing in the gap back home, were the moms and the grandmas and the aunts and the kids that couldn't quite yet go serve their country. And they picked up their knitting needles. They picked up that yarn and they made socks and wristlets and mufflers and sweaters. And if they couldn't, then they donated yarn and they donated money and they helped get the supplies in the hands of those that could do those things. And if they couldn't do that, then they did work for the people that were making the socks and the mufflers and the sweaters. So what can we do today? We can write notes to our men and women that are serving our country. We can teach our children to be thankful that we stand in a place that we have the freedom to do the things that we are able to do. We can send care packages to those people that we know or to soldiers that we've never met, men and women that are standing in the gap for us. And if we can't do that, maybe we can do service for people that have family members that are serving somewhere. We can cut lawns. We can pick up dog poop. We can babysit. There are a lot of moms and dads that have spouses that are serving in other parts of the world, and it's a hard calling. My husband was in the Navy for 4 years, and we did not have children back then, but he was on the most active ship in the military, and that meant for those first 3.5 years of marriage, he was home 11 months out of that time. And sometimes I just needed a friend or a cup of coffee or somebody to just sit with. And so we can do that. We can teach our kids that. As we focus on boys in socks, getting the boys socks during World War I can bring that time period in history alive. But then we can also bless somebody with a pair of socks that's knit on the antique machine in that same time period. It's such a fantastic opportunity. So do this for me. Make sure that you go and like Emily's page, 330 Knits. There's a story behind 330 Knits too, why it's named that. And you can dig and find out that message or what that story is for Emily. But find her page and like it on Facebook. If you are looking for an amazing handcrafted gift, then the tea cozy or a scarf or one of those squishy balls or a pair of socks makes a fantastic gift for somebody. But if you pair it with the knowledge of where the machine came from and the heart of the people that were behind this effort to take care of their boys overseas. It turns from something utilitarian, a simple pair of socks, into something so much bigger. So anyway, that's it. This is an amazing history lesson for your kids. And I promise you that the more you dig in and dive in and you learn and you study, you will just be dumbfounded at what the people back then were not only called to do, but what they rose up to do together. So anyway, thank you for tuning in. We've got another speaker coming soon next week. And so I look forward to talking with you guys again next week. But I love you all. I hope you have a great day. And go check out Emily's page and get a pair of socks or grab the printable or something. It's a fantastic, fantastic thing to pass on to your kids. Have a wonderful day. Bye.